Goedenavond, hartelijk welkom bij de laatste avond van het programma van Autoriteit. Well, I would like to quote a thing that he said about composition, and he even said that in when your CD was released. It was more or less about your music. It's a rather long quotation, and I read it out loud. But I think it says something very specific about composition in general, and maybe about your composition in specific. The quotation is, strangely enough, music is always judged by its beauty. Strangely enough, because good composers only rarely strive for something which people call beautiful. Composers strive for clearness, functionality, explicitness, emotional expressiveness sometimes. They want to move listeners, to shock them, or to clarify things. They want to pose problems, not to solve them. They want to show that the world, including the world of thinking, is more complex than we want to think. My question is then, don't you strive to compose something what people call beautiful?
I paid him a lot of money to say that. I was surprised when he wrote that, because I don't know whether that's true about me. I think it tells you a lot about what he stands for. And when it's like a little manifesto, and it's actually something which I completely agree with, that life itself is not straightforward. And when you're a composer, or a painter, or a poet, you do one thing and another thing and another thing, and I think at the end of your life, you can only then look over, people who follow this sort of thing, the public, can see the output of someone. Michael Tippett, for instance, who died in January, age 93, the British composer, was a traditional composer in a sense. He wrote symphonies, or pieces for orchestra, operas, choral music, string quartets and piano sonatas, very traditional forms, although none of their music is traditional really. And it changed like Stravinsky's music changed, and he lived a very, very long life. He was composing 3 years up before he died. And he was scorned throughout his life because he kept changing and doing different things. Every time was a new problem. And suddenly he was dead. All these rave articles appear celebrating this incredible creative personality. And I think it's because you can't take it all in until someone perhaps is dead, that you see what they have achieved. And you do all of those things. Sometimes you deliberately want to shock in a crude sense. Other times, very personally, you want to do something which is explicitly beautiful in a traditional sense of beautiful. And you are posing problems for yourself as well. But half the time, a lot of these things are very subconscious. Like Colin Curry, the marimba player, he's still a student at the Royal Academy of Music, believe it or not. This phenomenal musician. And he is deeply involved in this music. And he was telling me about the fact of how complex these 4s against 3s were and how the phrases were arranged in 4s and 3s, and I was completely unaware of all of that. I must have done it because I wrote it. But there must be levels, intuitively, where you simply aren't. And I think that when Mozart was writing, he had a certain technique, and things went in subconsciously that he perhaps necessarily didn't know he was doing. And now, of course, we say it's great, great music.
But the music you write, what do you want to present to the audience? Is it music that they must like, that they think is beautiful, or is the function that it make them think, or maybe all of them, I don't know.
Well, it's a combination of things, but when you're writing a piece, or when I'm writing a piece, must stop saying when you. Like all composers should do that. When I'm writing something, the first thing is terror, because you've got to write something, and it's got to be as good as, if not better than the one before it. And I have a terrible problem. I will delay and put off starting something, which is why my windows are the cleanest windows in the street, because I'll clean the windows all the time, every day, rather than actually getting down to doing what you're supposed to do. And that's a great weakness. It's a great weakness, because I won't write hundreds of pieces because of that. But once you've started, you are so involved intellectually and stimulated, in fact, once it's going well, that you don't stop and think at the end of the day before going to bed, now I hope people like this, or they're going to really like this bit here. It can't be that way. When it's finished, the first thought is, well, if it's for the band, the next terror is, They really love horses of instruction. That's the great piece for them. Is this going to be as good? What are they going to think of this? And there's this horrendous pressure on me because of this lot, expecting this great masterwork. And you can't necessarily come up with that. So there's that pressure. But at the end of the day, the reaction of an audience or people at large is ultimately immaterial to me. Of course, it's hugely important for the band, because they are practicing musicians who thrive on physically communicating. Composers, when you talk about communicating, are communicating in a much more abstract, metaphysical sense, I think. And because I conduct the music, which is also another total terror, because it's so difficult to do, never mind play, but just actually coordinating the whole thing. I mean, this music is perhaps some of the most difficult music there is to play that is being written today. Doesn't mean it's the best, but it's certainly, in terms of performance, some of the most difficult. And you're talking about communicating at various things. You want to get people stirred up or think it's doesn't you physically or move you in some way. I never get a minute to think about any of that because I'm concentrating too much when we're performing. So I'm actually quite abstracted from the music I've written. So if I hear a recording of it, I get much more pleasure from the fact that I'm now under no threat of anything. I can just sit down and listen to it and think, I know it's not going to go wrong because it's on a recording. Otherwise, my stomach constantly is sort of thinking, anything will go wrong at this moment. You just turn a page by accident and you've missed a beat, you've had it. So my brain is extremely well exercised.
Well, but for you,
you meant more. I'm sorry to interrupt you. You meant more than that. I'm being very flippant about this. Yeah, there is an intellectual. I do believe that music has an important, if not the most important, role in society and in our lives, right across all cultures. There's no culture in the world that exists without music, and never has. And it's caused lots of trouble in all sorts of cultures, music, right throughout the ages of history. I mean, Islamic cultures, for instance, ban music, it's not allowed, which must mean something. And I think that it's because it relates in some way to our collective subconscious. It's an archetypal experience, which is to do with religion. Not religion in the sense of believing in a god and such things, but I think it actually demonstrates, it brings people together and brings things out in people individually and collectively that demonstrates that there is a religious, however you define that word religious, a spiritual quality to individual human beings. And in the West, which is a very individualistic society, as opposed to, say, African society or Chinese society, I think music is very important because it highlights all the divisions that do exist.
And again, it comes from William Blake, as I said earlier in the talk, and it's one of the epigrams from his quite early long poem, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. And what the epigrams in this are when he heard the angels in hell saying various little things. He realised they were very wise, and he came back to earth and turned what would seem a negative thing into a positive thing. The horses of instruction are, no, the tigers of wrath. The tigers of wrath are wiser than the horses of instruction. And that's where the title comes from. As I explained in the talk, they just about managed to do that.